Welcome to a new year at the Time Crunched Cyclist podcast. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. To kick off a new season, I thought it would be fun to talk about the fountain of youth. But that doesn't exist. So I figured we'd talk about something that does exist, which are key aspects of longevity, health, and performance. We'll not only identify what these aspects are, but we'll talk about how to train for them and develop habits to cultivate a whole lifestyle around them. Now, to discuss this a little bit more, we have a very special guest today. He's the founder and head coach at Rocky Mountain Devo, the top physiologist at Fast Talk Labs, as well as working alongside Dr. Andy Pruitt at the Boulder Center of Sports Medicine. He spent 2 years as the manager of the BMC Mountain Bike Devo team and has worked with the USA Cycling Junior Mountain Bike program for the past 8 years. With a degree in exercise science and a master in sport nutrition, we could literally ask this guy any question, as I regularly did when I worked with him at CTS, and he would always have the answer. So Ryan Kohler, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Not sure I have all the answers now, but glad to be on here talking about this. And good to be on the podcast after our CTS days.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Well,
Yeah.
one clarification already. If he didn't have the answer, he could usually go research it and develop a good answer after that. So, which I'm sure we're going to do today. But the first question I have for you, Ryan, is, first of all, just thank you for joining us, because I know you got a couple kids, demanding job, wife, and all the things, right?
Mhm.
But I got to ask, are we interrupting any tele skiing or other Colorado adventures just to make you talk about nerdy endurance stuff today, or what?
Not yet really. The resorts are getting there, but only thing we're interrupting this week is the festive 500 and a lot of trainer miles on Zwift. That's about it. So this is a welcome break to all that.
Oof. So
Yeah.
you're knocking it out on the trainer, huh?
We're trying. It's the only option because it's not happening outside. I can guarantee that.
Yeah. That's true. We did we had a whole newsletter article. We had a podcast about the Festive 500. We talked about indoor, outdoor, and all this kind of stuff. So good luck to you. I am not doing it.
Good idea.
Just to let you know.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, we want to talk about these key aspects of longevity, health, and performance. So straight over to you. What is the one biggest key thing that you're looking at, or what is maybe a couple if you had to choose more than one? What's one aspect that you're looking at as a physiologist, as a coach, with all your time in a lab? What's the number one thing to look at that our listeners can identify with when we're talking about health, performance, longevity?
Yeah, so this one doesn't always go over great with the endurance athletes because we've had a bit of a change. These topics come up every 5-10 years or so, and they sort of become hot topics again. But like you said, there's multiple that are in there. So for me today, it's VO2 max is really what I start to look at, and that's something that fell off the radar for a while, from what I've seen in the labs. And we see over the years we've had a big push in zone 2 and mitochondrial health and LT1, lactate threshold 1, with more accessible lactate testing. So we've seen a lot of that stuff come about for endurance athletes, and that really sort of took the spotlight for a number of years. And VO2 max got pushed on the back burner a little bit, but the concept has been around for decades, and it's really, when we talk about longevity and health and performance, you can sort of put different percentages on how important that is across those different areas. But in terms of longevity and health, it's a huge predictor. The higher your VO2 max, the better your quality of life. And that's something that I always try to bring into the coaching with someone, whether it's someone highly trained or relatively new in different age groups too.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And when we're looking at topics and questions from our audience members, this is something that I wanted to just, I don't know, come out the first week of the season and come out swinging with, because it's like, hey, if you want the secret, here it is, and it's been here for a while.
Exactly.
We'll talk about that here a little bit more in a second. But for those of us who maybe don't know what VO2 max is, or we're like kind of scratching our head and be like, oh, what do we actually mean by that? Can you tell us just kind of a working definition of what VO2 max is and how it applies to health? And we'll get to performance as well.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple things. We have the V and then the O2 and then the max piece. So it's this amount of oxygen that we can essentially bring into the body, and that it comes into the lungs, and that gets exchanged in the lungs and then transported out to the muscles and then finally taken up, exchanged in the muscles. And then the max portion is basically saying, well, how quickly can we do that at our maximum capacity? So there's a lot of things that play in there where it brings in your respiratory system, and then even what's happening at the cellular level, out at the muscle level. So it's a fairly complex process for how simple the definition really is.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And I think the reason why it's correlative to health as well as performance, because from the performance side of things, I think our audience is like, well, yeah, duh. If I
Yeah.
get more oxygen in, boom, I'm going to go faster.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, if I can get more oxygen into the system, or if the VO2 max is higher, it usually means that my equipment, my mitochondrial density, my red blood cells, all the equipment that goes on into carrying oxygen into my body is like fully optimized as well, which means my vital organs, my cells, they have plenty of oxygen to thrive, not only just survive, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that VO2 max, we also can hear it referred to as like your engine, your aerobic engine
Hmm.
from, at times. And that's a great description, because that word aerobic is really the key component. When we do
Hmm.
exercise, there's a certain, at 100 watts versus 2 versus 300 watts and so on, there's a certain oxygen demand for someone, and that's when we go through those intensities, that demand needs to be met. And if we can meet that aerobically using that strong aerobic system, that's a good thing for endurance athletes. And then, yeah, where we start to see that limitation come in, we know, well, hey, things are changing there, and our sustainability now is dropping off dramatically. But yeah, that's why, like you said, it's those aerobic processes require oxygen. The more we can bring in and deliver, yeah, the better it is for the whole body system.
Yeah. And one last thing, and Ryan said it, but what we're talking about here is quality of life. It's not extending the years of life. So if you have a 90 VO2, it doesn't mean that you're gonna live to be a 102.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation. But generally speaking, quality of life will also go with it, so long as we have good habits, and we'll talk about that too. So
Mhm.
it, let's just go again, kind of like straight to that target center of the bullseye that we're aiming for here. If VO2 max is so awesome, how do we improve it? What can we tell our audience and on how to get the biggest VO2 max possible?
Yeah, well, we know that the VO2 max is fairly trainable. So it's one of those components that should be included in your training, right? And when we think about um, endurance athletes and the training breakdown, we know there is this big focus on aerobic development, zone two work, and that's been a big push over the years. But the other side of the coin is that upper end. So that zone two stuff is the easy area. The zone, depending what model you're using, zone three or zone five, and a polarized or a 5+ zone model, that's where you start working into that VO2 max intensity. And that's something that should be incorporated into the training. It's one of those things where, to a certain point, a little bit more can be better, but you can sort of quickly you can quickly overdo it on that as well. So, for some folks, one or two quality sessions a week like that are totally reasonable. In terms of time, the time per session is fairly low by comparison. So some folks may get adaptive responses with 5-6 minutes per session. We see some research in certain populations where just a few minutes of high intensity is great, and they may be coming from a very low level of fitness, and that's all they need. Working up to maybe 12 or 15 minutes for a lot of folks is a reasonable amount of time. So it's fairly short. It allows you the chance to have that high quality, and it plays nicely with the other training that you would do as an endurance athlete.
So what you're saying is, if you're crunched on time throughout the week, we shouldn't just do 5 days of VO2 work nonstop,
Yeah,
just
5 days might feel
VO2
a little
intervals all
bit
the time.
much. Yeah. Yeah.
Seven
Yeah,
days.
7,
That's not better.
7. No, it more is
Yeah.
better. If you can AM and PM sessions every day. Yeah.
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 Well, all joking aside, yes, there is a mixture here,
Mhm.
right? In the aerobic development side of things, like Ryan said, vastly important. But a few qualifiers here. I did do an episode all about this actually, and it's episode number 70. And for some of our audience members that have written in and said I listen on Spotify, the episode numbers aren't on there. They are on there now, and they will be moving forward. We're working on the historical aspects of it too, but the date on that one is October 7th, 2021. So if that helps in going back and learning all there is to know about training VO2 max, please go and listen to that one. That's a very in-depth episode about how to do this. Ryan, when you were saying about doing about 7 minutes of VO2 work and working up toward like a 15 minute, can you explain what that means? Like, how would you break that up with intervals?
So one of my favorite workouts, my go-to workout is 4x4.
Mhm.
So 4 intervals of
Yeah.
4 minutes each. And that's just one of those classic ones that gets you 16 minutes of work time roughly.
Yep.
And that's always been a go-to for me. I might switch up for some athletes and we go to that 3 minute range, but somewhere in that, 3 to roughly 6-ish minute range is more what I look for with those, longer intervals.
Yep.
And then on
Yep.
the other side, if you go shorter, you can look at those very short on off style intervals, 40-20s, where you go hard for 40 seconds, rest for 20, 30-30, 30-15. You can mix those up different ways. But yeah, that's what we're really looking at is accumulating time in that zone, quality time, where, you're not only, and this may be getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves, but, we train with different devices, but power and heart rate are two of the big ones. But it's when I look at the training, I'm looking to see one, is our heart rate achieving a certain amount of time in there? So we know we're spending at enough time at a sufficiently high percentage of VO2 max. But then also, if we're working with power, then are we able to actually sustain that output? And, do we see that across, say, all 4 intervals where we're, at an appropriate power, right? Exercising intensely enough as well. If we see the first interval go off great, but then we end up dropping down to threshold, that's not a quality interval, even though our heart rate will still continue to rise. So we have to look at both of those to really focus on that quality component.
I'm glad you mentioned that. A quick question on that is if you do see power dipping down into threshold or below,
Mhm.
what do you tell your athlete? Keep going, or do we shorten the intervals, or what do you do?
Yeah, if we see that, then I would start off just checking to see how they felt that day. We need to assess that readiness and say, well, did you come into this well rested? Was it just a bad
Mhm.
day? Or potentially are those targets set a little bit too high? Or was your pacing strategy off? Did you, when we talk about VO2 intervals, say a 4x4, we can start off really hard and then do a peak and fade approach where you eventually kind of find that sustainable power, still well above threshold. But you compare that to more of a targeted approach where you go up and you get like the nice tabletop. We can just look at those different approaches and see, was it more of a tactical error, or were you not prepared, or do we just have to reduce your targets and change that up so you get better quality?
Yeah, exactly. And that's so the reason I asked that question is for a lot of our audience members, you got to know that VO2 work is not perfect.
Yeah.
It's going to be messy, and you should go out and you should fail. Actually, sometimes the
Yep.
goal is to fail through that so that if you're working with your coach or if you're coaching yourself, you can look at that data and then kind of adjust accordingly. Because sometimes it is shorter intervals, sometimes it's not spiking, right? And
Mhm.
doing more anaerobic contribution to the effort, making it more block style so you get through it. Or kind of why Ryan was saying before, where say you start with 4x4 because that's what you heard me and Ryan talk about. Well, maybe you only get through two of the intervals, okay, because that's all you can handle right now. Completely appropriate.
Mhm.
Like start where you're at and then build up from there, and that's some just like solid go to advice on VO2 work because it is super, super hard. It's very emotional and it's very messy. It'll never be perfect.
Exactly. And I'll even say, just to follow up on that, I had a nice little breakthrough from an athlete this morning who he was doing 4x4s. And historically, he did them on the trainer on erg mode, where it was this really nice little, perfectly drawn out interval session. He did them
Yeah.
outdoors. And it was on, roughly a 4-minute climb. And his feedback at the end, we saw it, and there was a lot more variability, of course, as expected. But his feedback was, wow, that was really hard, number one.
Mhm.
And the takeaway that he came away with today was, what I really learned wasn't about making the power or anything like that, because he hit his targets, which was fine. The big takeaway was, I learned how to relax and settle into that pain cave,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
And if you can
Yeah.
do that, that's going to bring the quality, because I feel like you said, they're messy, and it's easy, I think,
Mhm.
to, when you're doing those workouts, it's easy to get yourself in that totally gripped mode where you're like stressed and just burying yourself, and you finish, and that's why you're hung over the bars, cross-eyed. And that's another piece of feedback is I'll always give an athlete is like, try to keep one in the chamber if you can. Like, don't finish like
Mhm.
that, because then you're going to prolong your recovery. And then if that means we only do one a week, well, let's fix it so you can do two of those a week.
For sure. And I think too, like we talked about the aerobic aspect of these things. And before we do VO2 work, oftentimes it's building the athlete up aerobically to the point where they can now benefit and handle adequate amount of VO2 work that is high quality based on power and heart rate data. So, with that being said, Ryan, like, what would you recommend in a way of, I don't know, maybe overall percentage of time spent aerobically versus anaerobically, or what's one thing that our audience should pay attention to before they go into a round of VO2 work? Like, where would you want your athletes to be before we hit VO2 at this time of year or at any time in the year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd like to see, I mean, I'd want to see them fresh. That's probably the first
Yeah,
thing. So
that's good.
knowing where they're
Yeah.
coming from, I like to have them coming from a good base. So they might be doing zone two, maybe some tempo done the right way and the right intensity. But I want to make sure that they sort of have that itch of like, hey, I'm ready for this. Like, let's do
Yeah.
intensity. And just that readiness, sort of assessing their mood can give us a great handle on it. I think the tricky part is if you have someone coming in who's um, trying to hold a fairly high volume of threshold work, perhaps, or they're on the trainer a lot this year, maybe
Hmm.
racing a bunch on Zwift. We would need to look at those things like, hey, what's your training load looking like now? That CTL, that ATL, what are those looking like coming into this? And how does that compare to previous seasons? So if they have historical data, are you coming in at a place where, hey, you've reached a peak CTL for 3 years? Is that a great place to do it? I don't know, maybe. But it's something where we just need to sort of take that information and build out their story to say, yeah, is this a good time? And are you really just fresh to start handling this stuff?
Yeah.
And is there the willingness to also, shift away from other training to support the high intensity?
Yeah, that's the perfect
Yeah.
answer in my opinion. A few weeks ago, we did a podcast about readiness,
Mm.
about how to bring yourself into a block fresh. So roll back maybe 3 or 4 weeks, audience members, if you missed that one. But that's it. And I think to answer that question that I just asked, I mean, that's a complicated
Yeah.
question because it depends on so many variables. But I think you hit the nail on the head where if like our audience members, they've been training for a while. So general fitness, probably good.
Mhm.
But the key thing before you enter in a VO2 block of training like this is get fresh for sure, full stop. Now, if you're new to endurance training, maybe 6 months or something like that, maybe give yourself a little bit more time of aerobic development. And we're talking zone one, zone two, zone three, zone four, all the zones, right?
Yep.
Progress in a way, follow a training program that's good. And then we hit rounds of VO2, but then we also cycle back around as Ryan said before, once you enter in this VO2 block of training, you're probably going hard 2 days a week with the rest not hard.
Yeah, yeah. I find when I'm in that block and it's true, proper VO2 training, you know,
Hmm.
getting ready for an event versus maybe this time of year where I'm using it more as maintenance and keep it fun, then it's, 2 days a week, solid. If it's this time of year, probably one.
Let's explore that for a second. To keep it fun, and this time of year, meaning we're talking about January when we're recording this.
Mhm.
Um, Talk about some of the goals there with your athlete. Like, what's an end goal that you're looking for as a coach? Not only fun, but from maybe the data standpoint, and what is that 1 day of VO2 doing for an athlete that's riding the trainer and not riding a ton of volume?
Yeah, I mean, for one, it's giving them a balance, and we're looking at just how can we best spend the time. Essentially, for my athletes, it's always going back and saying, all right, like what's that vision for this year? And then as we bring that down to essentially quarters, then we say, yeah, does it, well, one, does it fit in, right? Does it fit in to
Mhm.
do some type of high intensity training? And usually that's a yes. But it's a balance thing, right? If you're on the trainer, nobody wants to be on the trainer for that long. So there's that balance component. And then it's also, like you said earlier, it's something where if you do some VO2 max workouts now and fail at them, there's no consequence. So this is a great time of year to learn that, and you can even take a more conservative approach to say, hey, let's build you into these so you learn as you go. And if you fail, you fail. We try it again next week. And the other aspect of it in terms of the physiology or performance outcomes would be to just keep a little bit of that load in there, because otherwise
Yeah.
they wouldn't get it. And that, the higher the intensity, the quicker you lose those training effects. So it's something where if we can keep one foot in the door by doing it once a week, then yeah, I think it's a helpful piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's it. And that is also something that I use with my low volume athletes is keeping some high intensity in there because it's going to maintain VO2 max. It's going to maintain anaerobic energy systems so that when you do come back to, high volume or group rides or something like that, it's there versus,
Mhm.
in my opinion, if all you do is zone 2 for 10 to 12 weeks, you're going to lose adaptation on your VO2 max in anaerobic capacity.
Yeah, and particularly for the masters athlete too, where we know they're losing some of those high force muscle fibers, and if we can keep them
That's
in
right.
touch with that, that's a great way to keep them feeling fresh. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of these other aspects that go into building and maintaining VO2 max, Ryan. So how does genetics play a role? Because I think historically VO2 max may have gotten a bad rap of it's genetically set. I can't do much with it, but all of a sudden you also said it's very trainable. So let's talk about some of those dilemmas in the world of physiology.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we see in science where I mean, there's support to say, hey, yeah, there's a huge genetic component, and basically, we always heard, hey, you pick your parents or you didn't pick the right parents, and you know, so we've had that, and I think that's part of science is, yeah, we'll see those messages come out, but it's also we see the results outside. And this is sometimes where the research may lag behind a little bit because there's always new methods of training and ways to apply training stress. And plenty of great coaches that are exploring this, and they may find, hey, I got a 12% increase, and that flies in the face of this research article. Okay, that's great. When my athletes, ask about, and this is one of the things when I'm testing someone, they're always, they get their VO2 max and they say, well, how much can I improve? I'm like, I don't know. Let's try it. We don't know, and that's one thing. And I'll tell them that same story of, hey, yeah, there's a strong genetic component, but let's figure out what works for you. What do you respond well to? And then let's find out. Maybe it's only 5%. Maybe it's more.
I don't have the numbers here in front of me, but you spend a lot more time in human performance labs than I do these days. But I mean, we're talking about a trainability effect of
Mhm.
5 to upwards of 20%, or is that
That's
a little too
reason.
high?
Yeah. No, that's totally
15,
reasonable.
20?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you tend
Yeah.
to see
So
those higher percentages typically in the less fit individuals, more like the
correct.
clinical studies, but yeah, yeah, totally
Yep.
reasonable.
Yeah. So I think for audience members listening here, if you've been one that's like, oh, my VO2 max, it's, my parents are bad or my parents are good. I don't need to train it because I'm solid. Like
Mhm.
that's not the case. You do, in my opinion, you should train VO2 max for performance as well as these longevity aspects that we're talking about here because it's going to move the needle in the way of going fast, which is super fun, and also just becoming more fit and more oxygenated human being, which is
Mhm.
vital for
Yeah.
health and wellness.
Exactly.
So, what other things go into it? I don't know. From a nutrition side of things, do you eat a bowl of kale and does your VO2 max increase?
Oh,
And then let's talk about sleep.
yeah, kale and seaweed. Those are the,
Okay, just kidding. Don't eat
no,
bowls of kale. That's
no.
not okay. So, what role does nutrition play, Ryan, if any at all? I have no idea. You're the nutritionist.
Yeah, I mean the nutrition, the whole nutrition field it's interesting how it's always evolving and changing, and I feel like it's just an evil pinball game half the time where
Yeah,
we're just
I agree with that.
bouncing back and forth on a board. But
Hmm.
yeah, in general, the way I look at nutrition, I mean we know there are specific things that can support particular areas of your performance. For VO2 max, we're talking about that aerobic system. We're talking about uh, basically a near maximal involvement of muscles. So we need a lot of this support. There's a high O2 drive, so we need to support all of those things. I haven't seen a lot in terms of like, I don't know of any magic supplement that's going to dramatically shoot your VO2 max up. But I look at nutrition in the sense of saying, okay, we want to have a good micronutrient balance that will generally support that level of activity. And if we're getting in adequate energy, right? If our energy availability is high enough to support changes and adaptations, we've got that piece dialed. If we have a good macronutrient distribution of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, then we're going to be able to, replace the carbohydrate that we burn during high intensity, and any muscle damage that comes in, we can use protein to help support that amino acid pool. And then the micronutrient standpoint, we look at that, and yet there's tons and tons of things that you can go into there, and all the way down to the cellular components to say, okay, where does magnesium fit into it, and particular supplements. But yeah, we can look at all of those and find areas where they might fit. But in general, I think it really comes back to say, it's that general healthy approach of a varied diet with a good mixture of nutrients, particularly from those colorful foods. And if we can do that consistently, that's going to give us a great starting point. I think for most people, the second we start going down, especially for time crunched cyclists, right? The second we start going down the individual supplementation route of, oh, get, magnesium for this and iron for that and B12 for this, it's too much to manage, So, and I think the biggest thing is in nutrition is our habits and how they fit into our lifestyle. So if we can maximize those, get those right 80% of the time, yeah, we'll support ourselves to create an environment where we can do quality VO2 max work, which means then we can work at a high enough percentage of it, and give us the recovery so that we can add and do that consistently over time.
That's it. There's no magic pill. There's no magic food here. This is the boring answer. What actually matters, and it is the yeah, eating colorful stuff. Boo hoo, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we make habits of doing that, and we eat enough total calories, and we eat enough total carbohydrate, like Ryan's talking about, we're going to be able to have more training days, train better, recover faster, and get the benefit of training, which is adaptation. But we don't do that without sleep. So, Ryan, I'll just plug my favorite activity here in the world. How much sleep should we be getting if we want to maintain and build our VO2 max?
Oh man, yeah, this is a tough one. I get a lot of pushback when I tell people 9 hours, but they're like,
You won't get
you're
pushback from me.
kidding. Yeah. No, that's what I go for. It's something that
Yeah.
I try to always promote. If you can get 9 hours, I've found personally and with athletes that can do it, they just feel great. The recovery is
Yep.
good. They're monitoring things like resting heart rate and HRV, and those things stay in good places then. And I know it's just not realistic for everyone. Some people are like, well, I can't do any more than 5, 6 as a gift, and if that's the case, then yeah, that's what we have to work with. But that's a point where we might go back and say, hey, let's look at nutrition and your lifestyle habits to see if we can at least better support those 6 hours. If 8 or 9 is an absolute definitely not happening, but yeah, like 8 to 9 is a place where I'm pretty staunchly in there.
And for our listeners who have kids and they're like, hell no, I ain't getting 9. Like, Ryan, how many kids do
I,
you have?
I've got 2 boys, and they do their best to ensure I don't get it. But it's like training. It's like training. It's
Yeah.
yeah, and then that's where the responsibility comes back on me to say if I want to train
Yeah.
well, I'm going to have the organization here to make that happen, or at least as close as possible to it. And it's not always ideal,
Yeah.
but you're pushing toward it.
Yeah, and I can't remember who said it, but there's a quote out there that says, treat sleep like an activity,
Yeah.
and you'll have better success." Let's put it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
yeah, I
I
think
mean,
8 to 9 hours adequate. Uh, Adequate. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like you said, it's setting yourself up for success with it, just like anything else. You have to create those habits to know that, hey, when I get on the bike to do a training session, I had a
Mhm.
snack, or or I'm rested, or whatever it is. It's the same thing for sleep. You create that environment, create the habits that gives you the best chance at success in that event. Yeah.
For some of my athletes who have an Aura Ring, we have it set up so that it cues them an hour before or 90 minutes before to start to get ready for sleep.
Mhm.
And when I talk with my athletes about that, the habit is putting, turning off Netflix.
Yep.
It's going up to bed, starting, do your bedroom routine, brush teeth, get ready, and then start reading, low light, and set the stage for sleep. And that's how you develop those good habits for sleep, as opposed to just finishing the movie because you started it, or letting your kids stay up super late, or whatever else
Yep.
comes your way. But yeah, I mean, treat it like an activity, and then
Yeah,
you'll have
exactly.
success. So
Yeah.
speaking of kids, Ryan, and we're kind of getting late in the day here, but
Mhm.
you and I both work with juniors. I know you're super passionate about it. But what can we say to our juniors or our parents who are listening that have junior athletes, in the way of developing and maintaining VO2 max if they're not even thinking about, being a master's athlete or maintaining lean body mass when they're 70 plus years old? They're just thinking about going fast and ripping it up right now. But what would you say to our juniors or the parents who have juniors that are racing bikes, in the way of developing and maintaining VO2?
Yeah, I think for the juniors themselves, like we know they're really good at going fast. And if we throw them out at that VO2 max intensity, they'll do it all day long until their bodies completely give out. So I think they already have that gift to be able to do that. So I think
Yeah.
for them, like learning how to enjoy it is a big thing, and learning how to sort of tame it in a way where,
Mhm.
like, so they can see the value of it, because their tendency is they'll just do that as often as they can until they crack, and then they'll go do it again after they rest up. But learning how to sort of tame it, and then that also helps put them into that position of understanding the value of it as they go through that long-term development process, to say, oh, okay, I know how to train this. I understand the benefits of it. I understand that I can do too much. And, if they're in that mindset, sort of that more professional mindset as they're developing, then they see that as like, oh, this is something I can bring with me over the years, 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years later, they can bring with them. And I think, like we said earlier, it's a fun way to train, and that brings a lot of enjoyment. So it's one of those things for the juniors. I would encourage them to explore it, and just try to realize the benefits of it now, so they have it, and then they have that mindset of like, VO2 max isn't just for performance. VO2 max is also something I bring in later in life to stay healthy. And
Yeah.
yeah, on the parent side, I think I see this more and more. I don't know if you might as well, but I see with particularly juniors that are doing a mixture of sports. I hear from parents that they're doing so much high intensity, like in the pool, a swim team, for example. They're like, oh, the coach has them doing intervals 5 days a week, and I'm just like, oh God, why? And the parents know that something isn't right with that, because their kids come home
Mhm.
so tired. So I think for the parents, just learning this stuff, and like, listening to podcasts like this about it, and learning to say, oh, that's not right. And I now have a little bit more information where I can, hey, go talk to the coach and say, hey, let me learn why you're doing this, and let me explain to you how it's impacting, our kids' recovery. And I think it just gives them that ability to have that conversation, because in the end, it's the coaches, the kids, the parents, it's all about that junior, or that group
Mhm.
of juniors. So any information we can get, to help with that, to prevent them from burning out, is crucial, because they don't necessarily know how to prevent it themselves. And they listen to
Yeah.
coach, and they do what coach says, and they go from there. So I think for parents, they play a huge role.
Yeah, very vital role. And in fact, for better or worse, I generally think better, but I do
Mhm.
have the parents of my juniors really highly involved, and I encourage asking questions about why we're doing what we're doing. I share, I link their Training Peaks accounts to the parents as well as the athlete, as well as maybe a team director or something like that. So
Mhm.
everybody is communicating and on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also, you lean into the boring stuff again. It's like educate them on why zone two or zone three or zone four,
Mhm.
whatever's boring to you, but like
Yeah.
the whole, buffet of training intensities, why that's so important and why hitting the gas every single day is not the greatest decision,
Right.
even though they want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Ryan. Well, I have to ask if this is such a well established concept of VO2 max directly correlating to performance, longevity, and health,
Mhm.
and we've known it for some time, why do we humans keep searching for the Holy Grail when we seem to already have it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to try not to get on a soapbox, but it's for me, it's I think as a whole, we don't want to accept the answer that it's actually quite simple and it just takes hard work and dedication and commitment. And I think when we put those things out in front of someone, they want to go the other way because they want to find an easy way out. And it's like you could do it, you know, you can do it the right way, which is the boring way, or you can look for the way that's easier, where you're going to put chocolate on the broccoli to get it in your mouth, you know. So
It's right.
it's and I think yeah, that's just our nature. So for as coaches, yeah, it's always going back to like this should be kind of boring because it's just you put your head down, and if you want to do this, put your head down and you go and you commit to it. And I think
Well,
people don't want to hear that.
I agree with you. Full stop. I agree with you. So I'd say there's no better way to summarize the conversation that we had today other than your response, Ryan. So we'll leave it there. But if our audience members loved what we talked about today and they want to connect more with you, where can they find you?
Probably on my website is the easiest at just rockymountaindevo.com.
Cool.
Yeah.
We'll link to that in our show notes. I know that you make appearances and you're also working on the background over at Fast Talk Labs. Is there any episodes there to showcase, or should we just tell people to go check out Fast Labs?
There's a number at Fast Talk Labs. I can't think of any specific ones off the top of my head.
They go super in depth on quite a few things, whereas we try to keep it a little bit more fast paced over here. But they do work well for the topics where you want to deep dive into, and Ryan's there on a regular basis. So,
Yeah.
uh, Ryan Kohler, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about VO2 max and longevity.
Yeah. Thank you. Loved it. It's a great topic.